Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Ronsley, and this is episode number 363 of We Are Podcast, and I have the amazing Ken Okazaki in the house. We talk about all things video and video mastering. He's known in the space to be the person when it comes to video marketing. So definitely follow him for tips and tricks. He's got this amazing new podcast, and we talk about how that podcast supports his business, what he does, how he's come to this point. And the thing that I love about Ken is he is a constant learner. I feel like the constant learners are the ones that have much to teach us all. So enjoy this conversation.
You can't find your voice if you don't use it. This is We Are Podcast, formerly called Should I Start a Podcast? A podcast for podcasters who want a podcast that grows their business and brand. How many times can we say podcast in a sentence? Here's your host, Ronsley. He has interviewed more than 1,500 people, has been listened to over 5 million times in 133 countries. He has helped create over 1,100 podcasts for businesses, brands, and personalities. He's been doing this for more than a decade. Get ready to take notes. Enjoy the show.
I was very excited actually to have this conversation with you, Ken Okazaki. Firstly, because I love saying your name. It sounds really cool. But you've just launched this really cool product called GoBox Studio. But you've been in the video space for like ages. And before that, if I remember correctly, in the personal development space and event space. And how do you feel as an entrepreneur?
I definitely feel like a beginner. Here's the thing. I started entrepreneurship super late compared to most people. Well, I incorporated in 2016, but we didn't actually start doing anything until 2017. That's less than 10 years ago. So like in entrepreneur age, I'm really, really young. But I think that the thing that ruined me is Tony Robbins, because I didn't know the amount of negative stories, limiting beliefs, the level that of all that stuff that was controlling my life, where I blamed everything that was external. I went to UPW and I just, drank the Kool-Aid, went all in. And I was like, well, if any of this is true, then let's actually test it, And that's when I was like, well, I don't know how to start a business, but I'm going to do it. I don't know how I'm going to support my kids, but I'm going to figure it out. And because of that, I jumped at the first business opportunity that there was, which was hosting large scale events in Japan. And this is through some contacts I made in that Tony Robbins environment. So one thing kind of dripped into the other. Spent 2 years doing that, realized it made a lot of money, also way more stress than I enjoyed. And it just, most of my work was just admin work. That kind of rolled over into what I'm doing now, which is the digital media agency. It started off as me just being a videographer, making videos for my first clients were the speakers that would come on my stage. So one thing kind of pivoted to the next. And the latest thing, which is a physical products business, is again, learning from scratch again, manufacturing, import, export, prototyping, raising capital, quality control, FCC compliance. There's just a whole laundry list of stuff that I feel again, like I'm learning from scratch.
Yeah.
But it's something again, that resulted from me having a business that's working and then finding more ways to serve that same customer base. Maybe I'm trying too many things. So that's why I feel like a beginner all the time. Right. I don't know.
No, I think it's that evolution. I still feel like I think every time I'm learning and anything, I feel there's so much more I don't know, and I still feel like a beginner. And I actually feel like a lot of our clients are very similar. Like they kind of start a podcast to learn rather than a podcast to teach. So that's something we also noticed in terms of our client base. But I think it's a kind of person maybe, and considering you came from a Tony Robbins sort of situation, it's a constant learning. You're constantly looking at yourself, right? Because once you start that process of looking at your actions and you start looking at how you think and you start looking at the thought patterns and the belief patterns and the value systems and all that kind of stuff, then it doesn't stop, because you're in this introspection all the time. And to to amplify that, pun intended, like you if you have a podcast, which is what I want to talk about right now, and you're using your voice, because otherwise what happens is you're growing, but you don't have this way to find out whether what you believe is true if you don't use your voice. Like using your voice helps you refine your voice. Talk about the podcast, because you just started one. I mean, considering in your entrepreneur years, what made you start, and what's the whole process been like for you? Has that had any personal development for you? I'm keen to know that, actually.
Yeah, really good question. Thank you. I started because a lot of my clients started asking, can you do podcasts too? Because I think that these two worlds of video marketing and podcast marketing have collided. And now everybody who does video wants a podcast, and everybody who does a podcast wants video. So the video podcast is just the logical evolution. So all these clients who I've been working with for years, they're just like, hey, we should do a podcast. We should do a podcast. So, logically, I was just like, yeah, sure. Like we just record it for longer and then we edit the sound like this. And I understood very easily the technical process. There's, it's not rocket science. And we were doing it for a while. And then I realized that when my clients who consult me a lot, they ask like, how can we improve this, that, and the other? I knew nothing about the psychology of marketing and running a podcast. Nothing, because I'd never had one. So I thought, I think I'd better start a podcast that actually makes sense. And when I was coming up with a concept for the podcast, I subscribed to a whole bunch of podcasts that I felt like that I want to reach and help people like myself. So what am I interested in, right? In the realm of like entrepreneurship, business, and being creative. And I remember listening to quite a few podcasts where the person said some really interesting stuff, really, really, really profound sounding. And then I'd be interested in who was that guest interviewee or even the host. I looked them up, and a lot of times I question whether they're just repeating stuff they read in a book, whether they spend a lot of time trying to sound clever, because their life experience did not merit what they were actually saying. And that disappointed me. So I thought, well, that's the sweet spot. What I'm going to do is I'm only going to interview people who are making $1 million a year or more. If they're not, their advice is not worthy of being on my podcast. No offense to them, but this is specifically only for people making $1 million. And if content creation is a component in their business, it doesn't have to be the main one. A lot of people it is, but it has to be something that actually contributed to that $1 million or more. And then I thought to myself, yeah, if I know that every single guest on here is making at least $1 million a year, and content is a part of their business, then that's going to be worth listening to. I don't want to listen to, hypothetical advice. So I called it the content capitalist, and it's just, I started with interviewing just my clients because they fit the bill. So I'm telling their story. And once I had, I think like 10 episodes shot, then it was pretty easy to get more and more and more people. So that was the evolution of it. And I'm quite selfish in the questions I ask, because I want to ask the questions not necessarily that will be the most entertaining, but the ones that I can actually use and I can learn from. So that's been the format pretty much, and the reason I started.
What's the development been like for you? Like, have you seen any changes in yourself as a result of starting the podcast?
I think that when it came to content creation before, it felt like a bit of a hurdle. Like, okay, I've got to get all creative and think about the set and this and that, the other. Having a series like this helps me be a lot more consistent. There's less planning ahead. I also, in person, it's easier to reach out to people who a lot of times feel inaccessible. And Ronsley, if someone DM'd you and they're just like, hey, Rons, let's hang out for an hour and talk so I can talk, you can give me advice about my business. You'd be like, well, why don't you pay here first? Or, there's a whole process. You got to become my client. But if it's a podcast, the likelihood goes up quite a bit that you get access to these kind of people, and you do get to ask them real advice that's useful to you. So the proximity I get to these kind of people is much better.
Yeah.
One quote I took away from Tony that stuck with me, that's really true, is proximity is power. And when I say power, that means, doors open for you, opportunities, status. And I know status sounds like such a douchey thing to say, but status is really important for the right people to see you, right? Or to give access.
Trust. Yeah, it's a trust.
It's a trust, yeah.
Yeah.
It's let's just say it's a shorthand for trust. Like if someone's driving a Ferrari, there's an automatic assumption that they're in a certain status and they're more likely to get doors open for them. Now that's a little
And
bit of a
also
crude
what's
analogy
really
there.
yeah. So what also what's really interesting, Ken, I mean, to your point about Ferrari, I mean, it's interesting, right? How much the status symbols are changing over the years, right? Depending on where we're at. Like Industrial Revolution time, there was different status symbols, and then Information Revolution time, and now Intelligence Revolution is going to be interesting to see how. I mean, there used to be a time where smoking was cool. Remember that time?
Yeah, used to be a time where I could brag about my 15 wives, and that was status.
Oh my god, I don't know how that was even possible. Like, one is my limit. I'm sure for a lot of people is but here's the thing. You mentioned so many cool things here. I want to ask you this, right? You're creating this podcast for someone like yourself and you're putting it out there. How are you like empathizing with someone who is like you, but their journey a lot earlier on? Because that's the biggest gap, right? The biggest value alignment problem is us, especially when we're creating stuff for someone like ourselves, is the empathy with where we were before. And especially if you're an entrepreneur, different type of person that is very kind of driven in a lot of ways, that it's hard for me to value accomplishment. Like I've got to do so much work on the idea of accomplishing something. I just go on to the next thing. So how do you empathize with your audience? Like, so when you're creating the content, you're just like, I'm going to create this for me and then let's chop it up in a way that's consumable. What's your process like for that?
I think that there's two parts of this, right?
Yeah.
Number one, when I first started, it was just about getting used to it. And, so I Googled, podcast questions and things that would be kind of get more general interest involved. But as I dialed it in, and maybe this was around episode 20 or 30, I realized that my client base on average is, in paying me 6 figures a year in retainers, multiple 6 figures, some of them. And I don't need to dumb things down for these people. I've got a very small, viewership, less than 1,000 a month, right? Because of what we're talking about, it's like a dog whistle. The wrong people will not hear it. The right people will. So there's that aspect of it. However, my team brought to my attention that, when people look online and they see the performance of your public, posts, especially like in the podcast interviews, then that's also going to give you status and they're going to believe that you can help them get, better results. So I've dialed it to somewhere in the middle where I'm asking questions that are high level, stuff that's interesting to me right now. And then I also bring in questions that, I pretty much ask everybody that is going to help, anybody listening at any level. Things like, how do you overcome imposter syndrome, or things like, how did it feel to break that, the 7-figure mark in your business, So these are the kind of questions that arouse more general interest.
Yeah.
So I mix it up like that.
You also mentioned some really cool things there about consistency, and you didn't mention access as well, but I'll talk about consistency because I think that's probably the most important piece here, because it's like any habit, going to the gym, writing content, whatever it is, like podcasting. And you're also right in the sense that, now it's video podcasting. Even when I talk about podcasting, I'm kind of making it clear that it's a synonym for video podcasting, because I recommend everyone record in video at least, because the things you can do with short form video these days and the attention pieces that you can get. You've obviously seen how this short form content is working. What's your strategy to go from, I've recorded this, for this interview with my guest, to getting the right clip, and then how do you produce that clip, and then what's the process to get the best result from that clip?
So I'll start with 2 things I learned about the actual, the interview part, like what we're recording right now. Yeah. Number one, in order to get the powerful zingers, the 30-second to 1-minute short forms, I use AI to research the heck out of the person I'm about to interview. And then it suggests questions for me. And I'll spend a few minutes looking at all the questions it suggests and then what it's actually referencing. I built a custom GPT for that. And then I will compose the questions as a title for an article. right? So for example, if I was interviewing you, Ronsley, I would say something like, oh, by the way, are you an immigrant? Or were you,
Yeah.
you are an immigrant, right? Okay. It's gonna assume that you've been in business for what, about a decade?
15 years.
15 years. And how long did it take you to like break your first million?
Yeah, everyone says an overnight success, but it was 11 years.
So I would ask the question in the way that it could be the headline. I would just say, hey, Rons, I know you're an immigrant, and
it's not 11 years. That's such bad math.
Hey, it's Mick Hawes, host of The Toolshed. I love making my podcast, and that's primarily because Ronsley has helped me avoid a whole bunch of really basic mistakes that would have cost me a whole bunch of time, money, and energy. And Rons has compiled a list of these mistakes and how to avoid them, which is really a steal. You can get your copy where I downloaded mine at mistakes.wearepodcast.com. That is mistakes.wearepodcast.com. We Are Podcast. You can't find your voice if you don't use it.
Sorry, Ken. I'm so bad at this. It's like 7 years.
No, it's okay. Well, this is just 7 years. It's just an example.
Yeah.
But I would formulate the question so that that would be the hook for the video, and then their answer could be, shortened and cut up. But then I've done this long enough so I know that the question is gonna be a good hook. Now, whether their answer really, nails it or not will help us decide whether or not we'll use it. And sometimes they'll cut the question out of the edit, but then they'll use the words as the actual headline, right? So it'll be like how this Australian immigrant became a podcast millionaire, then that, because I baked it into the question. So all the elements are there, and they might just kind of rewrite it that way. That's one way. So that's one thing I learned about those spots. So my team knows when they're editing, like cut to all the questions and then pick the best ones, right?
Ooh.
Now, the second thing, a lot of times it's not necessarily going to be an interview podcast. It's just going to be a monologue podcast, and people send us that material too that we've got to work with. And this is where it takes a lot of talent. And I know that AI is trying to do this, and we have tested every AI tool out there that says we're going to find, all the viral clips in here and automatically edit it. It's still like total dog shit, if I'm honest. So I've got people who, the position in the company is called the content curator. I've also got a whole bunch of video editors. Now, video editors are really great at making things look visually amazing, animated titles, filters, backgrounds, you name it. They're not necessarily great at content curation. So we specifically have a category of somebody who's got to be born and raised and educated in the same culture as the client. So we have people in Australia, born and raised, educated in Australia, understands the cultural nuances, the inside jokes, the terms, same as the US. They get the pop references and everything. And they're the ones who are going to scan through all the stuff. I know we're recording this on Squadcast. It's going to go straight to Descript. And in Descript, the content curators scan through and they find the clips that are going to work. And they usually find a hook and a body, and then they will, chop it down into like a 1 minute length thing, and then send that project over to the editor to then go jazz it up with music and all the effects like that. So now the editor is no longer having to, jump back and forth between thinking, is this content actually interesting for the target audience? And how can I make it look visually beautiful? They're just making things look visually beautiful. The content curator is finding the context of the conversation that's going to appeal to the right audience.
Since you've played so much around with AI, consider this advice for like a business owner who doesn't have access to team, or probably has like one assistant or something. Like, how would they go about, because they have a podcast, right? And consistency is like the theme we're on right now. So keeping it consistent, because what tends to happen is like we're not using everything that we possibly can. So, I'm not seeing results as quickly as we wanted, or we had this idea and, let's just stop, or it's too hard to do. So, but now with AI and like the whole thing can come together quite nicely. So let's talk about how to process that and how to do it quickly and efficiently and usefully using AI to the best of its ability right now.
Let me just start by saying I 100% believe AI will get to that position where it will be able to find the most interesting stuff. And they even have this one AI model that's going to simulate viewer retention. I'm not sure how it does it, but then it actually generates the retention graph based on the edit.
Yep.
I tried it. It's just not, it doesn't translate to real life yet, but seeing the ideas and how AI has surprised me and probably the rest of the world multiple times in the past few years, I'm convinced it'll get there. It's just not there yet. Now, the second thing I want to say is that to anybody getting started, you guys are so freaking lucky. Like me starting, I remember the days when I used to edit a video and I used to type out every single word in the captions. And then, I'd highlight it, pick the font, and manually every single word. And we had a whole team of editors doing that. Now you could just shoot a video and automatically, generate captions, automatically do so much stuff. And if you're getting into the creative space now, compared to when I got into it, I think you're already like just maybe 3 years of learning the skills. You can just skip that and go straight into thinking about impact and content. So I envy you. So let's play this out. If I was starting, knowing what I know and trying to accomplish as much as possible using AI, I would definitely start with Fiverr. I'd take my recording, whether it's on Zoom or Squadcast or Riverside, whatever your recording platform is, and I would hire at least 5 people, send them the exact same project. And we're talking, probably $50 a person for this. And I would just write a list of instructions, and it would be number 1, like this is a full-length podcast, right? Out of these 50 minutes, please find, 10, 30-second to 90-second clips that you feel will perform well, and I write the description on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, and that appeal to this kind of person and that convey, X message, right? Whatever that is. And you get a really good sense very quickly when you see people's work. And then out of the people I hire, I look for the best one, figure out if they're okay working off of Fiverr, and then just bring them out as a contractor. And I would encourage them to use AI to help them, but I wouldn't hand it off to AI completely, because in my experience so far, it's still been a hot mess. Unless I really closely manage it.
What you're seeing right now is the worst it can be. Like just this thing,
like humans have just discovered fire is the stage we're at.
Yeah, right.
And we're like, getting burns on our hands, and we're just like, can't figure anything out. But dude, soon there's gonna be rockets going to Mars with fire.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you start to see it the way I see it, because it's people talk about it being artificial, because that's a key term in that. But if you understand that it's intelligent, it's not search, it's intelligent. And it's a silicon-based life form that requires power and data to survive in the right environments. Too hot, it collapses. Too cold. We're a carbon-based life form that requires food and water. Also, environment matters for us, like air, hot, cold, for us to function. And we're intelligent. And as a result, we create these things. And just if you start to imagine, understand that it is a creation, just like maybe if you believe in God, the divine intelligence. So it's really interesting that intelligence is such a interesting factor here. But when I asked you the question, you didn't kind of go, this is how you do it yourself. You went, this is how you outsource it and delegate it to someone else. That's super interesting.
There's something that I'm learning is I think a lot of people, when they're in management or in regular work environments, their focus is time management and efficiency. How can I do as much things as possible efficiently and get all my tasks done at a high quality? I think that when you're at the CEO stage, especially if you're a solopreneur, even more important than time management is energy management. You can't create great work or great results for your clients if you don't have the right energy. And let me give you an example of this. When I create content, and recently I started doing stuff I actually just love for the sake of it. I walk around Tokyo and point my GoPro around at stuff and just talk about stuff I see around me. And I realized that what I was missing was I had my calendar packed, right? Team meeting, client meeting, review something, write emails, and then jammed right in there, just very efficiently, is create content. And I get off of, doing 4 or 5 things, and then I look at the camera and I feel like shit, I'm just like, and I will create something, but then I watch it back and I'm like, that is, that's not even a good idea. And the delivery sucked. So if you are gonna, if you want your audience to feel your passion, your energy, if you want them to feel your conviction, you have to be in the right energetic state. And for 90% of people out there, tinkering around with AI or learning a new software program, uploading, downloading files, transcribing, error checking, that's going to do more to suck energy out of you than to put it back in. And we're talking about getting someone for like $50 to $100 to do what would be 3 or 4 hours for you. And they'll do it faster and better because that's all they do. So it's about energy management. And I don't think I could have seen it a few years ago, but I do see it now and I feel it now.
Just like you, I laughed earlier when you told me about AI and how you do research, because I literally, you should see my prompt. Can you look up Ken Okazaki? I'm interviewing him in 10 minutes and I need your help to introduce him well and ask him good questions. I wanted to consider the line of questioning too, please. Make a list of 10 great questions to ask him about his work and 5 unique questions that will make him think and ponder. I've still not gotten, I read the whole thing, but I've been going off script all this while, and it's been fascinating.
I did the same thing. I use it as my backup for if we hit a wall or if the conversation is not naturally flowing, then I'll look down and say, here's a question, and then we could get going again. But it's from a listening perspective with other people's podcasts, when the conversation flows from one thing to another naturally, it's just so much more enjoyable.
Right. And I think both parties as well are in more of a interesting state that I feel the conversation gets better. And one of the key reasons, Ken, I wanted to have a chat with you is I feel like there's this really nice link up. And I mean, your experience in video, I consider you to be the video guy. Like if someone says to me, I'm the podcast guy, I'm like, yeah, but there's a video guy, and that's Ken Okazaki, just because of the amount of things you see and the amount of people that you've helped. I want to be very specific about a certain type of show where you have, like, say, a regular live show that can be, say, restreamed to different platforms when you record it live, and it's recorded live in a certain manner. I want you to imagine, a radio morning show. It's a live show that's recorded and certain sections are cut up for podcasts. What would your advice be on how to create a live show? Maybe you can even suggest some tools and some ideas, especially because, your GoBox Studio, this product that you have, it basically allows you to create a studio anywhere you go, right? And even for people in places that can't, this is like such a good case study that I'd love them to think about is like, okay, why would I invest in good quality equipment? Well, if you had a live show and you could create something that you enjoyed doing, it was not a chore, it's not hard, it's not stressful. It is something that, to your point, I mean, this is all ties up very beautifully. Like your energy is conserved, you're saying the right things you want to say, and you're creating content.
It depends on a lot of things. Like, who's your audience? Is it going to be, general population and you want to get as many listeners as possible, like Joe Rogan? Are we, niching in a little bit more? Is it for entrepreneurs? Is it for sports athletes? So give me a little bit of paint a picture of what's the purpose of this? And then I'll give you my thoughts.
Yeah. I think niching is always important for whichever client, unless they already have an existing platform where they've built this big audience where, like Joe Rogan already has a platform. That's why he has that audience. But for most people, it's like, niching is important. So let's assume they are business owners, same sort of thing, business owners who have built a business. Some of them are solo or just starting off, but they're all, founder business owners, and either they do it or delegate it out, or they have a team that does it and delegates it out, or the company or the department.
I'll walk you through my thinking on this. First of all, if it's niche related, I would first of all go to look at the social media of all of my competitors, right? And the people who hopefully are doing, are a few steps ahead of me. And then I would look through all the comments and look for any unanswered questions in the comments, because these guys are too big. They don't have time to answer every single one. I would screenshot all those unanswered questions, and then that would be how I'd start it, because then I'd be penetrating into someone else's audience. And then I'd even tag that person and say, hey, I saw you answered it here. Here's, I'm going to go live and talk about that. So that's how I'd first shape my content plan, is by sniping the audience of somebody who's already established, right? Number two, if we go live, then, I do have, GoBox Studio. It will have all the bells and whistles, everything you need. But, I might be shooting myself in the foot. You don't need anything more than your phone to start. You absolutely don't. The tech stack would be your phone. Basically, it lets you stream on multiple platforms simultaneously. So you could be up live on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the ones you want to be on. And then I'd start gauging after a few episodes, which one am I getting the most traction in? Because the question I get a lot is, which platform should I be focusing on, or which one should we be on? And I always answer, we'll figure out which one gets the best traction for you, the best business results, and we'll optimize for that exclusively and repurpose for the rest. So the rest are just like bonuses if something happens, but we're optimizing. So I'd say optimize for LinkedIn if that's where you're getting the most results, or YouTube if that's where the most results are coming on. So first of all, now we'd be optimizing for one platform, creating that content. That's when we're going to figure out how long they should be, what format's going to work, and we just keep testing. Now, I'd say you should do this for at least 3 months. And you're going to have enough data then where you're going to start doing pattern recognition. You're going to start looking at the retention graph on all your content. And this is what I have an army of VAs for, is to crunch a bunch of data. But we examine what's the highest performing stuff and the lowest. And I only look at the top 10% and bottom 10%. And I make a list, what to do more of, what to do less of. And almost all the time, it's the stuff that algorithms can't spot. Things like, are you looking at the camera, or are you looking off camera like you're being interviewed, right? Are you taking a smaller portion of the screen, or is your face really filling the screen? Are you talking with your hands, or are your hands still? Now, the thing is, there's no right or wrong. Universally, there is a right and wrong for you in how it relates to your audience, because I've seen opposite data with different clients and different platforms. The one thing, okay, here's two things that are universal though. And I'll give this to you. And these are the two things that we track religiously with our clients, is something we call TTI, time to impact. How long from when you start the video to when you close the loop. When I say close the loop, it means like if you start with a hook statement, when do you give them the actual solution that they feel like is, matches with the gravity of the hook you gave them? What you do is you explain the context later, but you give the answer first, really, really fast, right? So shorten that up, right? That's a pattern we found that any social media scraping thing is not going to find. The other one is words per minute. How many words per minute are you speaking? And depending on the industry, every time something goes live, I would actually go find that person whose comment that we extracted from before, from wherever it came from, and actually, send them a DM, say, hey, I noticed you, asked this. I shot a video about that. Check it out. And it's in the beginning, it's really pick and shovel. Every single interaction has to feel personal. And every single comment should get engaged, whether by you or by an assistant. I recommend doing it yourself. Every single comment, doesn't matter if it looks like spam. Engage everybody, train them, because they're giving you the most valuable thing online. Like there's nothing more valuable online than attention and engagement. They're giving it to you, and by you not engaging, you're training them that it doesn't really matter if they engage or not, right? Yeah. Responding to every single one is how you do pick and shovel work and get people to feel like you're a real person. Now, beyond that, we talked a little bit earlier about repurposing, finding the short clips that become viral. Yeah. And then that's going to feed into your short form content plan and things like that. One thing I do with my clients, which kind of evolves as a result of all this, is because we test so much and we keep concentrating more of what works and keep purging what doesn't. Yeah. We have really high performing organic videos that can very easily be turned into ads. And because they're tested and we know that organically they perform, you'll get your best bang for buck. And a lot of times the video that we run as ads doesn't promote anything. All it does is it shows the right people, the right content that showcases you as the person who's giving that content. And then the ad is just the copy itself that goes with the description. Put a headline and that. You grab their attention and the right people are going to read it. And it doesn't have to be directly related. It still works.
I love how you've broken that down in terms of like how to think about it, create it, and then sort of get attention, because it's also really important. I think most of us think that I did that as a start as well. Like I thought, after the creation process that everything is done, but it actually isn't. Like there's so much more that has to be done past the creation process: editing, publishing, making sure that more people can see it, marketing, so on and so forth. KenOkazaki.com is where you go to find all the cool stuff you're up to, including, the GoBox. And that's such a cool invention, by the way. How's that journey been like?
I started by creating a solution for my clients. Before COVID, we used to send videographers to shoot the content. Once COVID hit, that shut down. And then we started making tutorials and shopping lists so they could set up home studios. Surprise, 90% of them really suck at that. And then finally, one person begged me to build it in a box and just send it so he can plug it in and use it. And after a lot of back and forth, he convinced me to actually do it. So I sent him a prototype. He loved it. And he took a photo, put it on Instagram, and got like 55,000 comments, most of which are saying, where can I get one? He calls me and says, Ken, I think you should make a business out of this. I think it's going to be a lot bigger than your digital media agency. And that's what I spent about a year doing: R&D, sending it to my clients, getting refinements, and kind of improving it little by little. About a year and a half ago, I took it out to a conference for marketers to test, do I have a hobby or do I have a business? Because I had to know, are people willing to pay for this? People outside of my client base. And we made multiple six figures in the first day. And I thought, okay, I think I've got a business. And since then, I've been developing it and getting it more refined so that we could start mass marketing and mass producing these things.
Well, Ken, this has been really cool. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you so much for listening. Listen to the back catalog of over 300 episodes by going to wearepodcast.com. If you're looking for something specific, let the We Are Podcast team point you in the right direction. Send us an email on podcast@wearepodcast.com. Also, if you know a business owner who has a podcast, ask them to listen. Share an episode with them. The conversations here are going to save them lots of trial, error, time, and money. Until next week, much love.